And I am live. Welcome into a live edition of the Fieldhouse Files podcast. I'm Scott Agness, taking you inside the Pacers' thinking with all of this when it comes down to it. A big move here this afternoon on Thursday, February 5th, as the Pacers finally get their center that they've been after really since last July when Miles said so long and accepted a fantastic offer from the Milwaukee Bucks. I appreciate everyone joining in here, whether you're live on YouTube or listening back on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy your podcasts. So much to get to within this, but I think number one, let's start with this deal. And it's one of those that makes sense for so many different reasons. The one hesitation, which I'll get into a little bit later on, is the protections for some of these picks. It's tough to not have fully protected draft picks within this. And what I mean by that is their upcoming pick this year protected spots 1 through 4 in addition to picks 10 through 30. So it falls between there, right? 5 to 9, the pick goes to the Clippers. If it does not, which is obviously more likely, but no guarantees, especially the way in which these lottery numbers have fallen, it seems like lately. It seems like there's always a team or two who fall back and one or two here who jump. Well, if the Pacers do not convey the pick this year, it advances or pushes back to 2031 in an unprotected pick. In addition to that, the Pacers are trading a 2029 unprotected pick. And I don't mind, again, moving 2 picks, but this is the gamble that Rick Carlisle, Kevin Pritchard, Chad Buchanan in that front office are taking here because who knows what this team look like coming up in 29 or 31 here. And it could be an opportunity where you're trying to rebuild and reset things, and more likely than not, it'll be after Halliburton and after Siakam and all these players that are on the team right now. And you, especially in this Indiana small market, you need all of your first round picks. So what I see here is it's Carlisle, it's Pritchard, it's Herb Simon, who's in his 90s, saying, look, let's try to maximize this window. Let's try to get it done. Let's make something happen. This is our one shot to do it here in the next 5 years. And they clearly needed a center more than anything. And so now you can kind of count on what their starting lineup looks like going into next season. Now, one thing I want to caution you with is we do not know what Tyrese Halliburton will look like. All things considered, he says he's ahead of schedule. He's doing many things right now at the Pacers practice facility. But that said, Isaiah Jackson was ahead of schedule, and it looked like he was getting there, but not quite 100%. So I'm very curious what Tyrese will look like in training camp next September when the season starts a month later in late October, and then also in mid-December when you start to really know for certain what a team looks like and what their outlook is. And right, we saw with this Indiana Pacers team where they were really struggling there at the end of December. There was that 13-game win streak, the longest in franchise history. They started 6-31. At that point, I think it was all clear, and we could back away and say, okay, it's not a playoff season for the Pacers. And so Zubac was one of the players that the Pacers were considering here over the last several weeks as they did the research, as they had their scouts out, gathering information and watching these players up close and to try to get a better handle, as best of handle as you could on these players. And I don't think it was a guarantee that they moved on from Mathurin at the trade deadline. I don't think it was a guarantee at all that Zubac was the guy that they would really go after. Now, Walker Kessler was a player. Chris Haynes reported that the Pacers made some calls in too to see if they could take him away for some draft capital or a trade as well. He's entering his restricted free agency, and you'd feel better about having him under your team control rather than going after them in restricted free agency. And this is the challenge, I think, right now for a lot of agents is there isn't much of a market in restricted free agency. You have to almost create a market. In a nutshell, that's what happened with Jonathan Kuminga out with the Golden State Warriors. He was a restricted free agent, and the Warriors made the best offer. He accepted. Therefore, he's also accepting what comes with that and the constant trade conversations, and despite wanting a fresh start. Well, here's the other thing I also want to caution against here is do not take for granted the talent and the competitiveness and the willingness to get to the hole and to get to the free throw line, all those attributes that made Benedict Mathurin special, that made Mathurin who he is. Now, this was by no means the Pacers wanting discard from him. If anything, this was them, number one, fulfilling a need, and that was getting a center. And we've seen how bad it's been at that center spot since the beginning of the season. They've trotted out 4 or 5 different centers at this point, and none of them have shown to be that starting guy, the guy they can count on every single night. That is without question your starting center that can play bully ball, that can play within a two-man game, that can go after him and rebound. And rebounding and physicality, those are two of the best traits that Zubac will provide to this Pacers team, by the way. Something that has been missing, something that will be much appreciated, I think, moving forward here. And so, right, the Pacers canvassing the market, seeing what's available. Daniel Gafford never interests me. I felt like that was just conversation more than anything, and worthwhile to reach out, see what it might cost. He was something like 18 million. Zubac about 20 million. And by the way, Zubac, the great thing about him is not only he's already under contract, he's in the first year of a 3-year deal, but more than that, his number is really, really good. To get a starting center in today's market for $20 million is a big success. And better than that, I want to point to what it means in the big picture. And that's why I talk about often the percentage of the cap when it comes down to it. And with Zubac, I think his was he was about 12% of the cap. What does that mean? Well, in particular, Siakam and Halliburton, they're at 30% with their max deals. So for less than half of a max deal, and for example, that would be like a Jaren Jackson Jr. So no question, JJJ, who was available and acquired by the Utah Jazz, yes, he would have been great. He would have been an upgrade. He would have been a local product, but not at money you would have been comfortable with. He would have been the highest paid player, I believe, on the Pacers right away at about 50 million. If the Pacers weren't comfortable getting to 25 million or even over 27 million, which is what Miles Turner got from the Milwaukee Bucks, they were not going to be comfortable with twice that for their center when they already have 2 max contracts on their roster. And realistically, in this market, you're not going to be able to afford 3 max contracts and on top of that, put together a team. So I love the number at 20 million. The reality is here, look, you're going to have all your bigs, all your centers here now at a price cheaper than what it would have cost to probably get Mathurin, but certainly what Miles Turner is getting at more than 27 million on average per year over the next 4 years. The Pacers, I'm told, were willing to do with him 3 years, 66. That was certainly their starting point when there was no other obvious contenders out there. But the Milwaukee Bucks went up to 4 years and 109 million or so, which about 27.25 million. Good for Miles. Happy for him. He had a great 10 years here, but then that left a gaping hole here for the Pacers to figure out. And I think they underestimated that position entering this season. No question about that. And this center by committee sounds great in theory, but realistically, you want stability. You want continuity. You want consistency, not just from that position, but also from that starting group. And I think at this point, through over half the season now, like 45 some games, the Pacers have already used over 25 different starting lineups, including a new one with this past game when they chose to sit players and such on the second night of a back-to-back here. And so, yeah, they're over 51 games. They're at the bottom of the Eastern Conference, 13-38 as I'm recording this Thursday night after the trade deadline hit at 3 p.m. Eastern time. And so this is not what you wanted at all this season. You wanted to be competitive. You wanted to build off of last season and have more success. It was not there, was not in the cards. You try to figure it out and see what you have for the first 2 months of the season, okay, and go from there. And the reality is things aren't going their way this season. That was very clear when it came to injuries in the first month of the season, when they had over 20 transactions, when they had so many key pieces missing. Basically, anyone but Siakam missed time here. And so now you're in a position where you have what, the third worst record in the league. You have the worst in the Eastern Conference. You're in the bottom of the standings. So now you're trying to make the most of it and move forward, right? And so Thursday morning, late morning, early afternoon, the Pacers reached agreement with the LA Clippers to bring on Zubac, to bring on Kobe Brown for several things. Number one, Benedict Mathurin, Isaiah Jackson, 2 first-round picks, as well as a second-round pick in 2028, which is acquired via Dallas. So not the Pacers' original pick when it comes down to it. And so now they're in a situation here moving forward where you realize the conundrum you're in, right? With this season, first of all, you're going to want to lose as many games as possible because you want to maintain that pick. This season would go as best as possible considering the circumstances, getting their center in Zubac, giving a trial in Kobe Brown, sure, and more than that, getting a top 4 pick. Remember, this is one of the few franchises, too, that has never had the first overall pick in the NBA draft. Maybe that could go their way, a stroke of genius, right? And I also want to give credit to the front office, too, for what they did quietly about 7, 8 months ago in the middle of the NBA Finals. What did they do? They went out and reacquired this first round pick, trading away their known commodity, right, of the 2025 first round pick to the Pelicans to get back their 2026. See, that was done before Tyrese got hurt and before, obviously, the season started with all the injuries. And so if you're the Pelicans, you're probably sitting there and saying, hey, look, the East is wide open. The Pacers will probably be the class of the East or one of the top 2, 3 teams. They were not quite that good here this season. So it's a gamble, small gamble. They get a first round pick no matter what, but they think the positioning could be better and they could look to improve right away. But nonetheless, Pacers basically able to get rid of that 2025 pick in order to have their pick back here this year. And now that's looking like it'll be a certain lottery pick. And they're really hoping, obviously, that'll be a top 4 pick. Because again, if it's pick 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, the pick goes to the LA Clippers. Benedict Mathurin in this, I did touch on him a little bit earlier, but with him, it was a situation here where I think, number one, it came down to a salary cap decision. Here's what I mean by that. Throughout this process, throughout every year, all teams are considering what their money looks like and where they are relative to the luxury tax. Right now, before this deal, the Pacers had about $5.5 million in wiggle room. That could allow them to be creative and take on, say, a bad contract, an expiring contract that would help another team, for example, fall under the luxury tax. You see it all the time. It's another reason why teams should not worry about being into the luxury tax in the early portion of the season, because throughout a year, you can always trade off assets and such to cut that bill down, like we've seen with the Celtics substantially. I think they had like over a $500 million charge coming, and I think they reduced it, I want to say, to something like 200 million or 150 million. Either way, they did an excellent job, right? But that required them to move on from several key pieces with all that. Okay. So in relations to the Pacers, they left an open roster spot after Tony Bradley's 10-day contract. Players are only allowed to sign up to 2 10-day contracts with the same team in one season. And so his second and final one was signed, I think, on January 19th, I think. And so it expired here in the last week, 10 days. Pacers wisely chose not to do anything with it. Why would you do that? Well, you don't want to tie yourself down and have to, like we've seen in the past, actually, where they needed a roster spot. So they had to waive James Johnson, complete some transactions, only to then bring him back. And so, that's complicated and unnecessary money if you can avoid it. And so in this case, they avoided it. Now here in this deal, it was 2 for 2, right? Zubac Brown, Mathurin Jackson. So nothing lost between the two teams. And on top of that, the Pacers will have one more roster spot available for this season and a little money to operate with when it comes down to it. Okay, talked about key portions of this transaction. I like the fact that Zubac's contract 2 more years after this one through the 2027-28 season. So much like we've seen strategically this front office align many of their contracts surrounding Tyrese Halliburton, who's through 2028-29, this falls in line because over the last couple of years, the Pacers have paid their own. I think they paid 6, 7, 8 guys in the last couple of years. Just go on down the line from Halliburton to Siakam to Nembhard to Nesmith, even Isaiah Jackson going into this year, TJ McConnell, Obi Toppin. And so it was Mathurin's time to get paid. And I don't blame the Pacers at all. I think they did the right move in the fall, not really having serious discussions with Mathurin and his representatives about a potential extension off his rookie deal. Let's play the season out. Let's see what he looks like. At that point, they knew he was going to have a greater role, probably be a regular starter because Tyrese Halliburton would be out. So the presumed starting lineup, I mean, not even presumed actually. Rick Carlisle went on record saying, big opportunity for Mathurin ahead. He'll be in the starting lineup with Andrew Nembhard. And guess what? Again, like we've seen several times throughout these last few seasons, what began as one idea ended up as another. And I think Mathurin was frustrated that he's the player he is. He is the second leading scorer on the team. Started the season with 5 games with 21 plus points, and that's despite getting injured in the second game of the season down in Memphis. Right, he had that turf toe injury that he struggled with, and definitely had derailed his season, and will continue to, because the only thing to heal that is time off. I've seen players deal with that, including Miles Turner previously. Forget what year it was, maybe like 21. It was certainly a year when they were lottery bound, but he didn't play the final like month and a half of the season to get that right. And it also worked out because it helped make sure the Pacers had more losses to their name. But give Mathurin a ton of credit because through all of this, he's continued to play. He's battled through it. And then he got injured again with a different injury, just a fluke type of situation there with his right thumb sprain. And that bothered him. And that's in large part why I think his shooting and scoring went significantly down from 20 some points per game, second leading scorer behind Siakam, to 10, 11 points per game. It was on his shooting hand, on his thumb. You could see head athletic trainer Josh Corbeil have to wrap it before games, and even throughout the game, they would tweak it up a little bit. And so, again, that's something that he's still continued to play through, has not been 100% probably since the first game of the season when it comes down to it. So, Zubac, let's talk about him here and what the Pacers are getting from him. He's a guy that's not yet in his 30s. He's right in the peak form. And how I started out my column at fieldhousefiles.com about this trade is throwing it a blast to the past with November 27th, 2022. Remember that? I guess it would be almost, what are we talking about? 3.5 years from now, previously. And it was a game where he almost had a 30-30 double-double. He finished with 31 points, 29 rebounds as the Pacers struggled mightily against him there against the Clippers. And so he's a guy that averages a double-double. He's a player that can do really well in pick and rolls, much unlike Miles Turner. They did a lot of pick and pops where he would shield out to the top of the arc, and Miles loved that shot from straight on. I think in this role, Zubac cut more towards the basket, finish along there, can be really good on the boards, especially offensively. That's an area where the Pacers have struggled in all my years covering this Pacers team, which is now like 13, 14. I've never covered a good rebounding Pacers team. You probably have to go back to maybe a David West, Roy Hibbert type group when they had some success rebounding the basketball. Just their bigs have played differently and have not been that dominant rebounding big. And anytime, too, I should note that they would face an elite center like Jokic, like Embiid, the Pacers would crumble. They would have issues at that center spot inevitably. Zubac is no superstar here. Yeah, he might earn his way to an all-star because one thing, if I'm pitching him, even though it's obviously he was acquired through a trade, but you know what? You can tell him and his representatives here to kind of get him excited. is say, look at all the players around Tyrese and how he makes them better and how he helps them get paid. Everybody around Tyrese has gotten paid in addition to himself, whether it's Miles Turner's incredible deal, Siakam, obviously, but he could earn that on his own, Neesmith, Nimhar. The list goes on and on. And so that's something, if I'm Zubac, I'm very excited about with the possibilities, is the untapped potential there. Yes, he's not as quick. He's not a Giselle out there able to sprint up and down the court. So it'll be interesting to see the Pacers playing style. I'm very curious to see if in general the Pacers will strategically choose to slow down a little bit, if anything, for more durability, for better health. Because to me, it seems like this playing style, faster than ever, setting records, more possessions than anyone. It's fun. It's enjoyable. Players like it, but is it sustainable? They're in year 3, and what happened at the start of this season, coming off a shortened offseason, coming off an NBA Finals, so many of their bodies came out and had issues. And so you don't know for sure, but I got to believe all those things contributed to it. And so one of the things we saw, I want to say a month into the season, that the Pacers tweaked to try to adapt, in large part because of their players and availability and to keep guys fresh, is they stopped pressuring full court and applying that additional pressure both on themselves and the workload on their bodies. And so that's something they adapted. I'll be very curious here, the final 30 some games of the season, what they look like in terms of minutes. Does Siakam, does Nemhard still play 34 minutes per game? Ideally, I think that number caps out as around 30 if you could have your way. That's something you really want to be cognizant of. But I'd like Zubac and the contributions he'll make, especially at this value contract. Going into last offseason, when Miles was a free agent, the number I was kind of going off of was 27, 28 million. That was my working number. That's what Isaiah Hartenstein had signed for. He had a great run with New York, got there to Oklahoma City for about that number. Turns out Miles Turner went for basically that number at 27.25 million on average over 4 years. And the Pacers, because this deal is existing because of the Clippers, year 1 of a 3-year deal, they're basically getting Zubac for 20 million per year. Good value. I think we'll see Mathurin, despite being a free agent in the offseason, I would expect him to command more on the market, more than that 20 million. And if he came back next year, it's clear how the Pacers play him and value him. He's a sixth man in this role. You can't pay a sixth man, or don't want to pay a sixth man that rate, especially when you don't have a starting center on your roster. Now, you do lose your backup potential in Isaiah Jackson. He's in the first year of a 3-year deal that he signed in the offseason for $7 million per. Remember, he was coming off an Achilles tendon tear, just like James Wiseman, and was one of the centers that popped sometimes, but his real issue was just things went against him, especially foul trouble. It seemed like he'd start a game, have some excitement, but 3 minutes into the game would have 2 fouls and have to go to the bench. That was a lot of cause for concern, I think, if you're this Pacers team. So then you tried different options, right? You have Jay Huff, who's a rim attacker, right? He can finish with the great flushes. He can knock down the outside shot. And then you have Micah Potter right now, non-guaranteed contract for next year. Huff's is. But with Micah Potter, you may not bring him back. But if you do, he could be your third center. And I'd like that. I don't mind that whatsoever. He'd be relatively cheap. I think his contract would be for $2.5 million, if I recall correctly. And he gives you a different look. And I like that. That resembles what the Pacers had done previously, is they didn't have a lot of redundancy in a position, but instead guys that offer different looks. With Jackson, it was flying up and down the court. It was high rim attacks. It was dunks, but we didn't see nearly as many dunks from him since the Achilles injury. That was the number one thing where I think you could tell he wasn't quite his old self just yet, is he used to dunk at seemingly every game. McConnell would just toss it up to him. He'd throw down with great ease with one hand. So you get Zubac in this deal. You move on from a couple players. I am a little bit concerned. I would have reservations and hesitations with this deal if I was the Pacers about the protections surrounding the picks, especially the known one, which is 2029 unprotected pick. Just because I'd always want to protect my ass, quite frankly. And you don't know. Maybe you are awful at that juncture and are have a top 10 pick, and that's not protected. Ideally, it would have been top 10 protected at worst, top 5 protected. They did not get ultimately do any of that. I would suspect that was a sticking point for the LA Clippers. By the way, I should mention, so how did this all come together, right? Well, a lot changed, I'm told, in the last 36 hours, and that's because of what transaction or deal was agreed to earlier. What happened? Well, James Harden, who's a fringe all-star, probably would have been an all-star if he's in the Eastern Conference, like he is now, decided I'm done with the Clippers. Maybe because he didn't get all-stars. Maybe because they had the drama with Kawhi Leonard, Steve Ballmer, potential allegations that Pablo Torre's done a great job documenting. Who knows? This is probably the fourth or fifth time, it seems like, where James Harden has wanted out. And so what's interesting about it is now he's in the Central Division, right? Cleveland Cavaliers acquiring Harden, who's 10 years older, in exchange for Darius Garland, who seemingly hadn't gotten healthy in the last couple of years. So while the Clippers get younger, what does Darius Garland look like from a health standpoint? That's the risk there. But from there, that's when you really saw uh, Lawrence Frank, the executive for the Clippers, who's a former IU manager, by the way. So there is some connections there. Lawrence Frank, former IU manager working on Bob Knight's staff. The Pacers vice president of personnel, Ryan Carr, he used to work on Bob Knight's staff as a manager, was, I think, roommates with Pat Knight, who's obviously, Bob Knight's son and everything. And so there were some connections there. And when Harden moved on, that's when we saw the Clippers pivot a little bit and start listening to more offers and consider their direction. They were, as of a couple days ago, the oldest team in the league, right? So many veteran players, the ones obviously start with Kawhi Leonard and James Harden. But now they've gotten off that and significantly changed that with a couple of these trades here. Now, Kobe Brown, we'll see. By the way, he's on an expiring contract. He made this work. A player that then the Clippers were also able to get off of. Excuse me, but he's in the final year of a contract. And so it gives an opportunity for the Pacers to see if he can play and in what ways he could contribute. He's a little bigger of a guard, more of a modern guard than the Pacers have at 6'7", just in his third year. But the Clippers seemingly didn't believe much in him because they elected not to exercise the team option on his contract back. I think it was in October 25th was the option date on that, and they declined it, therefore making Brown here a free agent in the offseason. As for Isaiah Jackson, he was a player that until this Achilles, you had great hope for, right? And expectations. You weren't sure if he'd ever be a starting center, and that's okay. He was drafted, I think 22nd. The Pacers acquired that pick with a deal, I want to say, that was like Aaron Holiday and a couple later picks through the Lakers, if I remember correctly. But they drafted Jackson. It was kind of during the pandemic. I remember being there, one of the few reporters there at Ascension St. Vincent Center when they had the welcoming press conference. He was one of their first-round picks. The other was lottery pick Chris Duarte. And so now, several seasons later, neither one of them is with him. And Duarte, not even in the NBA. He's really battled some injuries, even like he did here in his latter portion of his time here. But now you move forward. Everything certainly changed with this Indiana Pacers franchise when Rick Carlisle elected to come back for a third reunion. Assistant coach, head coach the second time, and then now a head coach for the second time. And, in January, we saw him get his 1,000th win as a head coach. He just had to wait 13 losses, a franchise record, to get there. But he's going to have a vision for this. He's certainly going to have to tweak things with this roster to make things work. But there's a lot of reasons I think Pacer fans should be excited about this move, why you should be thrilled for them solidifying a key piece moving forward. And Zubac is absolutely that. He'll be a key player that they can count on every single night. He doesn't miss games. He's been a player the Pacers have looked into for quite a while. They've had discussions with casually, I'm told, with the Clippers here in recent weeks, but those really intensified over the last 36 hours, and in particular this morning, before the teams were able to agree to a deal in the final hour before the 3 p.m. Eastern deadline to get this done. So, how quickly will we hear from Zubac and Brown? To be determined. Quite frankly, given that the Pacers want to have as good a draft pick as they want, there's no rush for them. Now, I will say that the deal is completed, agreed to, trade call happened, but it's still pending physicals. And so, what that means as of this recording here is both players from both teams have to head to their new franchises, be evaluated and checked out by the medical staffs, and get the okay. And Pacer fans, you guys know you can't just check that off. That's no a given. Remember what happened with Karis LeVert several years ago. The Pacers do a thorough scan and found cancer in his body because they did a rare check on his lower back area that most teams don't ordinarily do. Mathurin dealing with a couple injuries, but I have no reason to believe it should be held up. But I just don't. We have seen in the past why you cannot assume anything like that happening. Also, Pacers on the road for their next 6 games, including the first. I think it's 4 of them headed into the All-Star break. So we may not hear from those guys until after this team is back from the road trip and back practicing after the All-Star break. They're, February 20th or so. And wouldn't be the worst thing other than be great to hear from those guys already. But why there might be some urgency is if the Clippers really want Mathurin or Jackson to get in there here very soon, is both teams have to complete the physicals before the deal can be official and players playing for both sides. So that's one reason why there might be some urgency for both sides to get it done here quickly in terms of the physicals. All right, I'm going to wrap this one up. I appreciate everyone joining me live on YouTube. Have not done one of these in a while. Certainly need to do so more. And also to all those listening on your favorite podcast player. For our complete Pacers coverage, join me. Invite you here to fieldhousefiles.com. Become a free or paid subscriber where you'll get complete Pacers coverage as you have since 2012, and that will continue on. I've had some news this week. I might have some news for you tomorrow, Friday, so stay tuned, and a lot more. Some feature stories. And also, sadly, I got a couple feature stories on the outgoing guys, in particular, Mathurin, that I want to get to here while he's still relevant, interesting, notable here within this market. And Clipper fans want to understand him a lot more. But he's been a great asset to this community. His sister as well, Jen Mathurin, who's helped him run his foundation that they do kind of together, which kind of impacts this community in Indianapolis, as well as where they grew up in Canada. A lot of different things, some known, some not, that those two have been involved in. Jen Mathurin, very involved in the youth sports with girls basketball. She's at Butler all the time. I've seen her and such. So it's a player that's going to be missed, a person that's going to missed. And for me, it's always a little bit odd. I don't know what the feeling is, but it's a unique one when I've covered a player like I have both of them their entire careers. I was there on day one, right? With Mathurin and Nembhard, the thing I'll remember there is how the Pacers went all out for the Indy experience, bringing them in pace cars, lining the paved area leading to the practice facility with team employees, the introduction. Then they went to St. Elmo's, and they went to take laps in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Mathurin always fun. He was always a good interview. And Jackson, same way. A player that I got to know first through the pandemic and out at NBA Summer League when we were all wearing masks and things were just highly unusual. And he's kind of a local kid, right, from Pontiac, Michigan. His parents would often make the trips, and it was always a big deal when he went there and played the Pistons and such. But also, I do recognize there can be some value for all these players with a new destination, with a fresh start, with a new group of individuals evaluating you and deciding how you fit in within their puzzle piece to try to create a winning environment. It's going to be very interesting to see how these guys fit in, and even more so how the next 3 months go. Mark your calendars now, because a major date now we know of, May 10th, the date of the draft lottery held in Chicago before the draft combine there. And that will be, I think you Pacer fans will be on pins and needles and have some anxiety in the next couple of months leading up to that, eager and hoping for a top 4 pick where they could really get a significant difference maker no matter who they get, maybe as high as the top overall pick. All my work at fieldhousefiles.com, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and a lot more, as well as the Fieldhouse Files podcast. Thanks to everyone for listening, and I will talk to you all again soon. Have a great night.